Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a lovely day. Thank you for joining me here today. I appreciate your time. So, today we're going to be talking about action research and some problems that we can explore. We will address what action research is, what it entails, and how it differs from traditional research. Then I will give you an example of a topic that I feel would be interesting to further explore. So we can talk about what the problem I identified is, what my goal would be while solving this problem, who would be involved, what kind of obstacles I foresee, what the solution and intervention that I propose, and finally, I would talk about how we could measure if this plan is effective and sustainable. So I hope you don't mind, I have my notes right here because if you know me, you know that I like to talk a lot and I don't want to lose track of the main topic. So to keep myself in line, I'm going to be referring to my notes. So action research is a system of research with explanations related to a small number of variables, and the research is based on applicability and practicality. Traditional research, however, its methods focus on theory, methodology, suggestions, data analysis from a sampler subjects, and the study limitations. How these suggestions work after the research is conducted is often not discussed. Action research, on the other hand, ensures that subjects are also part of the research. So the methodology settles as the research progresses, and certain edits and changes can be made along the way. The aim is to involve the subjects as much as possible in the study and base the survey on their observations. In traditional research, the researcher usually assumes the observer role. So research shows us that when the researcher stands back to observe a group of subjects or for research purposes, often the subjects don't feel comfortable and they may not portray their normal behavior based on the idea and stress that an outsider is watching them. The researcher is usually perceived as an outsider, stranger, the other, if you may. This can cause flawed conclusions and judgments. For example, imagine a researcher in the field of anthropology or sociology observing behavior out in the field. The subjects may tense up and even try to hide from the researcher if asked questions or given surveys. They may not answer honestly and sincerely, as they would fear explosion or retaliation. So action research has the benefit of eliminating this problem. For example, those of us who have been through some teacher training throughout our lives, or pedagogical training or adult learning training programs, have learned about several teaching strategies to use in the classroom while teaching. Although we learn about these various theories, methods, and strategies, once we're in the real world classroom, we may realize that these strategies don't fit precisely like puzzle pieces that we thought they would be into our work environment, and as we thought it would be the case with our students. We have to find our own methods, we have to improvise, we have to revise our teaching methods, and sometimes synthesizing several different theories that we learned while we were taking these training programs. One example I read about was a case study where the instructor teaches a population of Indigenous children in Australia where his usual teaching methods are failing. So he discovers that he can succeed by involving the students in the learning process and learning from them about the geography and the culture of the area simultaneously. So teaching becomes a mutual relationship in this case, in action. So the topic I would be interested in exploring here, the example I'd like to give you, would be a group of individuals who work in various industries in the US in leadership positions, which would be my preference, and whose English is not their native language, and they've learned English as a foreign language or English as a second language. In today's interconnected and globalized world, the impact of globalization is more profound than ever. We can't argue this, far beyond what was once anticipated. The world now operates as a vast marketplace with national boundaries becoming less significant and distant regions accessible with a smartphone tap. Everything is at the tip of our fingers these days. As a result, globalization has become even more critical to our work environments especially. Organizations must adapt, evolve, and stay aligned with shifting consumer expectations, market trends to succeed. Thriving in this fast-paced environment requires businesses to remain up-to-date, perform comprehensive market analysis, and embrace innovation. Progress and technological advancements affect all stakeholders, while modern workplaces have become increasingly diverse and heterogeneous. This diversity, while enriching, also introduces several challenges, such as cultural differences and linguistic barriers that teams must learn to navigate through effectively. Exploring the cultural and linguistic problems the teams encountered previously, and working with them to put together coping strategies would be interesting, and testing to see if the strategy would be sustainable would prove to be very interesting. So here's the problem. The problem is that individuals who learn English as a foreign language have an adaptation period while transitioning into their leadership positions in the US or the US-based organizations due to cultural and linguistic barriers and differences. What I would be looking for is to see if there's a way, such as trainings, workshops, that could help ease this adaptation period, maybe an onboarding program. My goal would be to put together such an onboarding program with the participants, considering their needs. So not a lecture-based training or a workshop, but something that they feel they need as the ones who have experienced these problems. As you may agree, many of us get hit with several trainings and workshops at work on a daily basis, and we feel it's just a formality, and sometimes these activities can feel superficial or unrealistic, if you may. You've probably all made the joke that this could have been in the email. As we already have very busy schedules, and work-life balance has become particularly challenging, especially in this post-pandemic era. So the short-term goal is to design something based on what each participant brings to the table. The design would look into everything from culture to life needs in the US, such as renting housing, buying housing, opening a bank account, since the US differs a lot from some of the other countries in this sense. Where to do basic grocery shopping, what are the work conditions in the US, organizational culture, even how to learn the necessary abbreviations we love to use here at work. Now, we have to consider that the organizational culture will differ from organization to organization. So we will not be designing a lecture about the organizational culture itself, but perhaps talk a little bit about how to identify trends, which could be more a general design that could be implemented in several different organizations and not just one. So databases could be consulted and used. Each participant or groups of participants can add strategies to the project and try and implement as we put together a general design together. So for now, this project will be limited to the East Coast as location, but further research to see if the end product could work in other locations would be welcome, as there's a cultural difference among states even here in the US, or locations here in the US, since it's such a vast country. So the long-term goal is to design an ongoing program, an onboarding process that creates an inclusive space and generates psychological safety, while also creating a sense of belonging for these individuals who are experiencing these difficulties in the first place due to linguistic and cultural barriers and differences. And to see if this design works, is it sustainable, and will it truly help ease the adaptation period for such individuals? So who would be involved? A sample size would consist of at least 6 individuals to be reliable. I would plan to reach out to several different individuals who are in leadership positions and have learned English as a foreign language, Time management is a problem for everyone, so not everyone may accept devoting time to this research. That's something that I have to consider. The methodology would be based on qualitative research. So typically 10 to 30 participants is sufficient for an in-depth qualitative and meaningful observation. For broader analysis, usually 30 to 100 would be appropriate, but I would like to limit my sample size from maybe between 10 to 30 individuals, depending on their willingness to participate in the research. So the first critical step to observe and determine problematic areas that need fixing. This phase can take some time, as problems may not present themselves immediately, and participants may not be willing to share their opinions or experiences before a relationship is built on trust and established. The participant needs to fully observe and determine these areas while simultaneously working on building a relationship with the participants. This is not a linear process like traditional research would be, which brings us to the next critical step, building these relationships. To build a relationship, the researcher must work on building a community where the research is actively involved. This is not an easy task. Research shows that the participants may become stressed, as I said earlier, and when the researcher is acting as the outside observer. They may not answer objectively and honestly. Moreover, they may be unwilling to participate while being observed and while they're being checked entirely. So the AR researcher must start building trust. One way is to select informal and neutral areas to talk to participants while building relationships with them. Once a certain level of trust is accomplished in an informal setting, then the formal setting can take place. The researcher could repeat the questions that they informally asked earlier, this time for research purposes. The aim is to ensure the participants trust the researcher and feel comfortable speaking to them. I recently read a case where the researcher was trying to build trustworthy relationships with the participants. And in order to do so, the researcher was using informal settings to meet up, to have coffee with them, to have tea with them, to go out on smoking breaks with the participants. And it was observed that the researcher was not doing research, but he was just spending his time, his every time, his free time, just enjoying his time with the participants. However, his aim was truly to build a better relationship with them in these informal settings, to get them to trust them slowly by asking them small questions, which then he could repeat at a larger scale once in the formal setting. So creating a process where regular feedback is shared is the next step to be implemented. Not only to listen to the participants, but also to inform them of the onboarding process. Effective communication is critical. Facilitators should effectively communicate with each participant regularly and organize ways for participants to communicate periodically, such as regular visits, phone calls, and informal gatherings. Each person must be linked to the other to discuss problems, celebrate accomplishments, maintain focus, and sustain a sense of belonging in the project. Styles of communication are also essential. Subtle and powerful messages must be provided in the communication to show dedication to the listener. The way one speaks gives a significant implicit message to the listeners. The researcher must use an inclusive communication style while ensuring the communication is mutual and not just one-sided or lecture-based. Designating tasks using language that signifies roles rather than status is an effective strategy. Straying from relationships of authority and exclusion. Moreover, deciding what type of software or technology will be used to create these inclusive meeting spaces is essential while ensuring meeting times fit everyone's schedule. Recording the process while determining the possible solutions is vital. Once suggestions are taken into account, it's time to strategize and implement them. This does not mean that the research is over, as the implementation must be regularly monitored to see if it's working and if it's sustainable. This step also requires extensive feedback and effective communication once again. AR is helpful when trying to find practical solutions to problems that exist in a community. However, it is not a linear process and does take a lot of time. So it presents several challenges. The researcher must act strategically while taking the steps to initiate, complete, and observe the process. The researcher needs to see how things work in the real world, not from the point of view as an outsider, but someone who is a part of the group and works with the group in unison. AR provides the opportunity by rendering the researcher as the self and not the other. AR is an excellent tool for taking traditional research a step further and finding a practical implementation method in the field by involving all affected groups in the study. So the solutions will be based on what the participants bring to the table as well. So it's hard to determine exactly what the conclusions will be in the end. But initially, if we had to make a guess, what I would propose is an onboarding practice that can be implemented when the individuals first take on leadership roles in these U.S. organizations in the U.S. The measuring process to see if this design is effective and sustainable will take time, obviously, as it needs to be implemented at least a few times, and further feedback is needed from the individuals who undergo the process. So I actually started thinking about this because a friend of mine recently moved to South Korea and started a position in a Korean organization. The organization had a similar onboarding program that all employees foreign to the Korean culture had to take, and it seemed very interesting. He stated that he found it very beneficial as he was transitioning into his new role while he was also adjusting to living in Korea, which is pretty different from life in the United States. So this was just a brief summary of an AR project, a possible AR project, and there would be many more details that would need to be considered, but this is just a start. Thank you everyone for joining me here today. As always, this has been a pleasure. If you have any comments or anything you would like to further discuss, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I would love the opportunity to discuss further. I look forward to hearing from you. Have an amazing rest of the day.